So everybody should be finished pretty much now with all the material, and what we gave out is the Shulchan Aruch, the Torah Beis Yosef and Shulchan Aruch and Nasa Kalim, and now we're just doing pretty much by the end of this month finishing and doing Chazara, and we have to finish off a few more shiurim on the Shulchan Aruch just to cover the material on the Shulchan Aruch. So today we're going to be doing Siv Zion, although it's only Siv Zion, but there's a tremendous amount of material. This is the variant, the Gea L'Maisa, both in Havana as well as the Gea L'Maisa. So we'll try to cover that today, and then we're going to probably have to make an extra shiur to be able to complete all the material before the time we finish and do a bechina. So as we know, by the end of this month we're finishing learning, and then we're doing Chazara up until like the middle of June. We're doing a bechina at that time, as we had on the Marmakama sheets. So we'll start again the Shulchan Aruch in Kufiyat Gimel Zion. The Shulchan Aruch says, "Ein shkiras atanur mo'eles el b'pas. Ava b'shar mas bashlan ein shkiras atanur v'lo adlakas eish ma'ila amorid el hanocha dafka." The Shulchan Aruch is paskening that this concept of shkiras atanur, which is Ramah says is preparing the tanur for baking the pas, as well as lighting the tanur or throwing anything into the fire. All these things don't help. They help with pas, but they don't help with shar misbashlan, with our sugya of bishul akum. We'll see in a minute why. The Fikach says the Shulchan Aruch, therefore, if you want to be mibashal b'machbas b'tanur of a coven, if you want to use a goy's oven, then you have to put your pot or your pan into the goy's tanur that he lit. In order for it to be mutter, there shouldn't be bishul akum. The Jew itself has to put the actual food inside. The Ramah says, "Agav yesh cholkim v'sir lehu the hadlakas eish ochiti b'gachal mahani in bishul kamula in the pas." Now again, the Ramah says the minig is like those who say that just like we find by pas a halacha that these things help, also by bishul akum. So the makar of this machlokas goes back to the Gemara that we saw in Lamed Chesed and Beis in Avodah Zarah. There the Gemara said, near the top of the Lamed Chesed and Beis, Amar Ravina, Hilchasa Harifta the Shagra v'Kachavim v'Afa Yisrael. If the halacha is that pas, that the goy did the shgira, which is preparing the tanur, and the Jew put the pas inside, Inami Shagra Yisrael v'Afa Avakhavim, or the other way around, that the Yid prepared the oven and the goy put the pas in. Inami, or a third case, the goy did both, prepared the tanur and put in the pas. All that you did was after it was already in there and already prepared, then he was machatah stirred the coals. That's all okay. So that the Gemara here is talking about pas, about rifta. The shala is, does this apply also by shar, bishul, or not? The lashon of the Gemara before that, when it talked about bishul akum, it said iboilahu, the very top of Lamed Chesed and Beis. Gemara had a shayla, heniach ava kachavim v'hafach Yisrael mahu. If a goy left put food on the fire, let's say put a steak, put a piece of meat on the grill, and then the yid came along, was hafach boy, the yid turned it over, like picked it up and turned it over. So then the Gemara said that the maskana that hafach by helps, and as long you need, in order to be usher, you need yad goy mitchila vad seif. If it's yad Yisrael be'emtza, then that's mitzaken the bishul akum, and it becomes bishul Yisrael. So for the mashmos of Gemara, the Beis Yosef medayik from lashon Gemara, as we saw, that the lashon hafach Yisrael is mashma, it's going on what the goy just did. It was hiniach, the goy, he put the food down, and the yid was hafach boy, that food, he turned that very food itself over. So it's mashma from that, and then the Gemara goes on top and says that by pas, it's enough that you prepare the tanur. They didn't say anything about turning over the bread. It's not something which is done. So the mashmois of the Gemara itself, if you take it kipshuto, is mashma, there's a yisodas to get chiluk between pas and shar bishul. Other bishbashlan, that bishul akum is chaluk from pas akum. Pas akum, you have certain kulas that you could just stir the coals, or you could prepare the fire, and that's good enough. But by bishul, you need more than that. That's the mashmos of the Gemara. simple reading of the Gemara. And you see that clearly in the Beis Yosef Medaik. You see that clearly in the Rambam as well. That the Rambam, when it comes to Pas Akum, he passes that Gemara. The Rambam Perek Yud Zayin, Machlos Asuras, Halacha Yud Gimel, says Hidlik Akum is a tanur of Afal Yisrael. If the goy lit the tanur and a yid baked and pas in it, Osha Hidlik Yisrael v'Afal Akum, or the other way around, the yid lit the tanur and the goy put it in. Osha Hidlik Akum v'Afal Akum, Ba Yisrael v'Nir Ha'ish Ma'at, and the Jew stirs the fire a little. Like the Gemara says, he stirred it. How much? The Rambam says Ma'at, a little stirring. We'll have to see what does a little stirring mean later on as we talk further. What does a little mean? How do we define that? O kavshu la'esh, or if you somehow otherwise arrange the fire, hov v'nishtatef v'malachsa pas harzim muteres. As long as you had a shtatfus in this malach of pas, and then it's muter. And he ends off. Afilu lo zarak ela eitz l'tochatanor hitra kalabasu. Even if you didn't actually stir the actual coals, but you just threw a piece of wood into the fire, that's enough to be shtatef. That's with regards to pas. But however, the Rambam a few halachas later, halacha tes zayin, by bishul akum, he says, Kol bishul Yisrael and ma'at bishulo yibein b'tchila b'misov muter. As long as the Jew has a little bit of bishul in the, whether it's beginning or the end is muter, the fikach in hiniach akum basar okdera al gav ya'ish. The goy left the food on the fire. V'hafach Yisrael basar. Here the Rambam goes out of his way and specifies that Hafach Yisrael is not enough, that it's Hofech b'Gecholin. Here the Rambam says Hafach b'Basar. Clearly you have to pick up the meat and move the meat, which shows them it's a whole different degree of involvement that you need for Bishul Akum that you need for Pas Akum. So that you see with the Beis Yosef Medaik, there's very sodistic a difference in the Rambam between Pas Akum and Bishul Akum. Many kuls we find in the Shulchan Aruch himself, Paskins and Kufiyat Beis in the Siman of Pas Akum and Halacha Tes. Paskins this Rambam and Halacha Yud Gimel that it's enough to have a Yishtafnus Ma'at. But over here, the Shulchan Aruch, as we just read, Paskins that it's not enough to stir the coals or to light the fire. You have to actually be involved with the actual food, the actual basar, the actual food itself, in order to be mastered. So, and the time of this, we have two reasons that brought down the Beis Yosef. We have the Ran and the Rashba both learned the Gemara this way. The Ran right there in Avodah Zorah and the Rashba in Torah Sabais both learned that the Gemara is only referring to Pas when it says his kulas and not to other bishul for two different reasons. The Ran says it's because there's a technical reason. It's a very technical reason that the way that a person prepares the tanur and the whole preparation process for pas is much more involved than it is for bishul. That you need to fire up with wood the tanur, and then you need to wait till it turns into coals, and then move the coals, brush them aside to the sides of the tanur in order to leave room to make the pas from the heat of the coals. So since it's such an involved process, it's if a yid will do that, then it's very nicker that he's involved in this afiyas pas. At any stage of that involvement, that we have a kula because of the involvement, it shows that the yid is involved in. He knows that there's an isser of pas akum, and that's why he stayed involved. The Rashba, however, learns that there's no difference between bishul and the Taz actually explains the Ran a little further that when it comes to pas, the Taz adds in a little bit of tavlin, saying that you have to actually do the firing up before the afiyas pas. Nobody bakes bread while the fire is on. You have to wait till it dies down and turns into coals, and that shows that there's a whole process that precedes the bishul process, and therefore it's more chashuv and it's nicker. Mashenkin, the Rashba learns that it's not a difference in the technical aspect of preparing the tanur. Rashba learns that it's one of the kulas that we say by pas that since pas is a staple food, like the Lashon is, the Rishonim use kedei chaya, because people need pas to live on. That's the reason we saw that there's the kula by pas palter, even if it was totally baked by a goy, it was a palter who is he's just a public ofa, not baking privately. So we had heter for pas palter because not everybody knows how to make pas, and everyone needs pas. That was considered the staple food everyone lives on. So together with that kula of pas palter, we find also a kula what makes it considered pas Yisrael. It's in line with those kulas, and that's why. But so here nor there, we can see if there's enough minutes or not between the Rashba and the Ram, but they both learn that there's a sodistic achillik between pas and bishul akum, which is in line with the Rambam, that the Rambam specifies that you need hafach. He explains the Gemara Kapshuto, hafach means a basar. You have to actually move the basar, as opposed to pas akum is enough to move the coals. So that's the psak of the Shulchan Aruch by us, and therefore the usual standard kulas that we think of by Bishul Yisrael are not going to apply according to the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah, however, said that v'yesh cholkim v'sir lehu that lokas ha'esh ochitiv v'kolam mahani in Bishul kamola in a pas. V'chen noagin is mashma is even the chatchila. There were no the chatchila to say that all these other heterim do apply by Bishul akum. So what is the Ramah? The Ramah is based on other Rishonim, the classical Rishonim, the Rashba and the Ran say differently. The Beis Yosef, in fact, actually has a suffix. According to those Rishonim, to say that it doesn't help to prepare the fire before. So he's dubious that perhaps they would agree that if you would be involved in the fire while it's the food is cooking, maybe they would agree that it is nicker. He says, but docha, because docha say that because they don't really sound that way. In Darkei Moshe, in fact, is docha that completely and says that no, according to the Rashba and the Ran, and according to the Rambam, it does not help even during the Shas Bishul to do anything with the fire. You need to actually do something with the food itself, according to those Rishonim. However, the Ramah has, like he often does, a list of Ashkenazi poskim, starting with the Maharai. With Maharai is the Baal Trumas Adeshin, with his Agois to the Shari Dura, as well as the Isra Beheter, that they we see from them. We already spoke in the previous year, but the Darkei Moshe brought down the Maharai that said that the reason that we're makel, one of the reasons to be makel by a goy cooking in the Jew's house, is that it's Yashar Shelo Yechata Echad Mibnei Abayis as a Gachalim. The Trumas Adeshin said that there's no way that if something's being cooked in a house, in the Jewish house, that the Jew won't walk by and stoke the coals at some point. So you see clearly from the Maharai, from the Trumas Adeshin, that stoking the coals during the time of the Bishul does help. And he holds that that's we're so kind of l'chatchila, according to the Trumas Adeshin, as well as the Isser V'Heter, which is one of the Iker Rishonim, late Rishonim, that the Ramah is Somachan often. And the Maharam and the Mordechai all say that that's the minig to be somewhat on lighting the fire, or either lighting the fire before the Shas Bishul, or to stoke the fire, which stoke the coals, or even throwing a piece of wood onto it, like we say by Pas, all apply by Bishul. And the Nosei Kalim say that the Ramah is not saying with his Rishonim another shot in the Gemara. He's masking that the Gemara is pashtus, not mashma this way. It's only din pas, not in Bishul. However, despite that, Tosfos said in Lamach Chesed Beis that there are certain halachos in this regard, that there's differences between Bnei Bavel and Bnei Eretz Yisrael. We have certain kulas in Bnei Eretz Yisrael that we're samachan, and this will be one of them. That it's going to be a yotzim and a klal. Usually, we always go with Shas Bavli. In this case, we have like a minig Eretz Yisrael. The minute took on, and that's going to be the psak of the Ramah. That's going to be deloka shas. It's a kula deloka shas, deloka gemara, but it's strong enough of a minig that the Ramah should say that noagin ken lechatchila. So that comes out to be a tremendous, now a very sodistic, a tremendous machlokas between the Mechaber and the Ramah, with a list of many kulas that with regards to creating Bishul Yisrael, to taking away the Isra Pas Akum. So we have to understand what is the Nekudas and Machlokas between these Rishonim, between the Rishonim on one side that say that it's only by Pas, not by Bishul, and according to the Ramah that it's even by Bishul. So I think we have to clear a very sodistic hakira. We have to delve deeply into this question as we do often, to understand what is the Nekudas Machlokes, what's the point that they're really chalak on. So what we have to, the Chakir we have to clear, we have to discuss is these kulas that we find with regards to pas, which are lighting the tanur, or stirring the coals, or even, Rambam says, throwing a piece of wood onto it. So is it pshat that through that, when the Yisrael lights the fire, or so on and so forth, is it that it becomes pas Yisrael? It's no longer pas akum at all. It's just through the involvement of a Jew at any point, then it's considered pas Yisrael. And there's no chesaron anymore of pas akum in it whatsoever. Or you could say it differently. You could say that these actions of stoking the coals and lighting the fire and so on and so forth, it doesn't make it pas Yisrael. Pas Yisrael means that the Jew actually baked the bread. In this case, the goy baked the bread. It's just that since the Jew had some involvement, he had some ishtatfus in what's going on, so then it's a heker that despite the fact that it's pas akum, there's a heker in it that the Jew has shown that he showed that he realizes that pas akum was something that we shouldn't be eating, and therefore he did a maisa that makes a heker to take away the chash chasnas. So this is the basic shaila: is the involvement of a Jew that we find by pas only a heker, or is it an actual changing of the status of the food to consider pas Yisrael? The nafkamina, tremendous nafkamina, is that although there's a machlokas whether a heker is enough or not by pas, because the kulas that we said by pas that we mentioned before, everyone agrees that by bishul Yisrael it's not enough to have a heker. By bishul Yisrael, you need to turn it into this be considered bishul Yisrael and not considered bishul akum. So now, whether or not the kulas we find by pas now will depend. If you hold that all it is a heker, then it will not apply to bishul akum, because bishul akum is not enough to be a heker. You need to turn it into bishul Yisrael. However, if you hold that by pas it's not just a heker, but it really turns it into pas Yisrael, if that maisa makes it considered pas Yisrael, so then also it should then cross over and apply by bishul Yisrael as well, because if it can turn it into pas Yisrael, it also turns it into bishul Yisrael. It's no longer bishul akum. So that would be the nekudas machlokas, the Machaber and the Moab, because the Shulchan Aruch says explicitly in Kufiyat Beis by pas. He quotes the Lashon of Rambam. The Rambam said again in Perkei Zayin Halacha Yud Gimel, you're allowed to do any of these kulas, even stirring the coals or even throwing a piece of wood in. Says the Rambam adds a time that the Gemara didn't say. She'ein hadavar elaliyos heker shapashal hen asura. That all you need to do by any of these things is to create a heker that their pas is usher. So it's similar to what we find in other halachas, such as we learned this in the din of Shia v'chazara, that to make a blech. The Iker Tam of the blech over there is also just as a heker, a reminder that stirring the coals is asar in Shabbos, and that's going to keep you away from coming to stir the coals. Or we find it by Hilchos Nida, that if you can't eat together with Ishtar Nida, but if you put something between them as a heker, so it's not usually on the table, then that breaks the chiba of that meal that's not going to come to an avera. So here also, similar to according to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, it goes in a similar vein that the reason that we have to do one of these meisim over here is to create a heker to remind us that pas akum is asur, in order that we shouldn't come to chasnas. So that's the mahalach, and therefore it makes sense why the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, the Shitasim that learn this way hold that applies only by pas. Mashenkin about bishul Yisrael, where it's more chamor. That's not enough to make a heker ba'amla. You have to turn it into bishul Yisrael, because Chazal, for all the reasons we spoke at the beginning of the sugya, why they considered bishul Yisrael, bishul akum to be more chamor than all these other halachas, than pas akum or yain or shemen or anything else, either from a pasuk or from a smachta, or as the original gzera that everything else flowed from. All the timing that we mentioned from the Rishonim in the beginning of the sugya make bishul more chamor, and therefore it's not enough to have a heker. You need to actually turn it into bishul Yisrael. And these things, these acts of lighting the fire or stirring the coal or throwing a piece of wood on, don't turn it into bishul Yisrael. However, the Ramah, however, learns that that's not true. That pas is no different than bishul in that regard. That if by pas also, if it's pas akum, then it would be usher. So we have to turn it into pas Yisrael. And if we find these kulas in Chazal, lagabe pas, that it turns these this bishul, this afia into be considered pas Yisrael. So therefore, it crosses over, and it's going to apply also to bishul. It's going to be the same thing. So this will be an asmachta. Why this won't be totally connected to Shas. Also, it strengthens actually the psak of the Ramah to say this mahalach. Because we do find explicitly that that applies to pas, and according to the Ramah, it's just a dogma for all types of bishul akum. It's not just said. It's not only being said in regards to pas; it's being said in regards to bishul akum as well. And therefore, there are more paskins that all these things help, and it's tremendous ramifications of the halach and the maisa. First of all, I just to show a few nafkaminas in this same chakira. And there are other psakim with the Ramah as well. This I saw in the name of Rabbi Ganak. Rabbi Cohen in his Sefer and Bishul Akum's quotes that there's I was trying to get this. Sounds very fascinating. Rabbi Ganak also has a kuntras on Bishul Akum I didn't know about, just found out about. So there, he says, he speaks out this Akira that we mentioned. And he wants to explain with this, the Ramah at the end of the Sif. The Ramah says that that even if the shtafis of the Jew, by stirring the coals or by throwing the eights in or whatever he did, was shelo b'chavana. He did it without kavana to be matir this bishul. He just did it. He just stirred the coals to make it a little better. He didn't have any kavana to be matir. So even without kavana, the Ramah says it helps. Shach and the Taz are cholakam, and they say that there's no heker in that. And there's no heker by, if they didn't have kavana for it to be matir the bishul akum, so then there is no heker to show that bishul akum is also. So Ganak explains with this kakira very, very, very nicely, very geshmak, that although there might not be a heker, however, since the Ramah holds that, according to the Sfor of the Ramah, by stirring the coals, you're not just doing a ma'aseh heker, but you're actually turning it into bishul Yisrael. Once it's bishul Yisrael batz musa, and it's cheftza, it's not just bishul akum with a heter, but it's a cheftza bishul Yisrael. So then, even without a heker, it's still going to be mutter. So the Ramah makes sense. Similarly, the Ramah also paskins another kula of eish mi eish. If a yid lights a fire, and then a goy lights a fire from that fire, and then uses the second fire to light the oven and everything, and even so, the Ramah says it's still mutter. And again, there the Achronim jump on that and say that that once it Bishleim, if the Yid lit the fire that directly lit the tanur, there's a heker. But if the goy lit from his fire and then lit that, so they removed the Yid from the process, so then it's no longer enough of a heker to make a difference. And the Chacham Sodom, because of that, choose to not pass on that Ramah at all. However, the Ramah, well, what's this for the Ramah? So it's very good now that if the Ramah holds that the involvement of the Yisrael, if you lit the fire, turns that into it turns it into bishul Yisrael. So any slav along the way turns that also into the fire of Yisrael. It's considered the Yiddish fire, and therefore, when the goy lights from it, then the fire that the goy has taken is not fire of a goy; it's fire of Yisrael. And the pot and the light in the tanur afterwards is called bishul Yisrael. So it's not a question of heker; it's a question of the mahus of what it really is, that it becomes bishul Yisrael. That would be the svar of the Ramah. Be that as it may, in the Lumdus, lahalacha, we find that this overall heter of the Ramah, we have a number of poskim, a number of mahalchim and achronim, whether to what extent to accept the Ramah. It's one of a very fascinating list of, according to the Taz, I'm sure we all saw this, the Taz says, because of his kashas on the Ramah that's connected to Gemara, and he learns that the Gemara Pashtas is only talking about pas, not about basar and other foods. So therefore, but the Ramah still says what he says. So he says that we could only be samach on the Ramah in a base Yisrael, in the house of Yisrael. But sirif the das of the Riva that we saw in Tosfos, that anything cooked in the house of Yisrael has no Isra Bishul Akum. The Pri Chadash, however, is cholak on the Ramah Gamri. He's dochet from halacha and says that the halacha is like the Shulchan Aruch completely, even b'diavad. The Gra, very fascinating. The Gra accepts the Ramah when it comes with regards to throwing in the kisin or stirring the coals while it's cooking, but he's cholak on him by hadlakas ha'esh, to light the fire to begin with. So, and they explain the Asal Mechalkas Binyamin and others. They say the Sfor Pshuta and the Gra L'chalik is that the Gra is holding like the Sfor of the Beis Yosef that said maybe there's a difference between what you do before the cooking and what you do with Shas the cooking. So the Gra is Makabal that Chiluk, and therefore he considers that if you lit the fire beforehand and now the Goy did everything else, there is no hecker in the actual Etzem Habishal. However, if the Jew did something while it's cooking, such as stirring the coal or throwing a piece of wood in, then that's a heker b'shas bishul, and that the Gra accepts the Ramah. The Chachmas Oram holds Chatchila one because of it seems to be connected. It's one of the coolest Deloka Shas, Deloka Gemara. So the Chachmas Oram says the Chatchila one should go like the Shulchan Aruch, but b'shas Chak or b'diavad we can rely on the Ramah. But even so, it's better that when you should do something that's not just throwing a little twig in, but do something that's actually makar of the bishul. But in limchos, you don't have to stop somebody or yell at them if they're relying on the Ramah completely. The Aruch HaShulchan also, since it says the loka din at shas, not like the Gemara, the Aruch HaShulchan also says only to rely on the Ramah b'shas chak or b'diavad. It's very fascinating. Despite all these tainas on the Ramah, the minhag of Rova the Hechsherim in the world, at least the Rova Hechsherim I know in America and throughout the world, most Hechsherim are samach on the Ramah, even the Chatchila. And that as long as, let's say, the Mashgiach lit the fire, and then afterwards the Goyim do everything else, the entire process done by Goyim, but the Mashgiach lit the fire, so then so there's some chatchila on that. It could be that they're holding that, even though the many achronim were saying that it can only be samach on the Ramah, but yabed shasat chak, they might hold that for restaurants and hotels. It's a standing shasat chak. It's a standing case that there's no way that all these places can always afford to have a full-time mashgiach doing everything, and consequently it's a standing shasat chak. There's no way to do without it. But that's a fact. The fact is that most hashkachas are relying on the Ramah Chatchila. So having some trouble here. Is anybody still on that can hear me? Just verify that you can hear me still.
I can hear you still.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Who was that? All right. So now we're going to raise a very yesodistic question, very important question, which is that since, like we're saying, that even the hashgachas and the hachsherim are sovach on the Ramah, now we find throughout the restaurant and throughout the hotel world that everyone's relying on the Ramah. So it would seem to be that this kula would only be for Ashkenazim, not for Sephardim. Because as we said, the Shulchan Aruch, we're passing like the Rambam, that's the minhag of the Sephardim is always to go with Mara and Shulchan Aruch. So this kula should not apply for Sephardim at all. They should need for the Jew always have to be there to be hafach l'basar. Basically, the entire bishul process will have to only be done by Yidden. You can't not be able to hire Goyish kitchen help to do any of this work because or at least at some you could have a Goyim hired. You're going to need for every steak and every meal and every that's prepared that a Jew will come along and stir it the actual food itself at some point. And we find that in the Sephardi world, we find that pretty much it's pretty accepted that all the let's say in Eretz Yisrael, all the Rabbanut Hashgachas all relying on the Ramah, and we find the Sephardim throughout Eretz Yisrael are relying on the Rabbanut Hashgachas in hotels and restaurants and etc. and products. So the question is, what's going on over here exactly? And so there are Sephardi poskim that have been ma'or this and claim that that they're doing wrong. But Ravad Yosef Zatzal in Yechaveh Das, it's in Chelik Hey Siman Nun Daled, has a long tshuva which addresses this question. He begins with a long list of Sephardic poskim that the Gedolis, the Poskei Sfarad, Edus and Mizrach, a whole long list of them that were taka very machmer, even b'diavad, not to be samach on this Shittas Ramah. However, he has a fascinating cheshbon that on one hand we find this long list that says Asr. On the other hand, he also is ma'or that we find that throughout Eretz Yisrael and wherever else he goes, he sees that the Sephardim of the world are all relying on the Ashkenazi Ashgachas without asking any questions, and as we know, our Ashkenazi Ashgachas are relying on the Ramah. So Ravadia was to great lengths to find a limud schus for the Sephardim of the world that all are eating in restaurants and hotels. And it basically does the following. He says that he wants to create a speksteka, the din over here, whether or not there should be an isser in let's say in a hotel in today's world or in a restaurant. First of all, there's one suffix whether or not the halacha is like those Rishonim that the Ramah is paskin are like. It's a very significant list of Rishonim that hold that it's enough to have hadlakas ha'esh, Ayidei Yisrael, to light the fire, and so on and so forth. Like stirring the coals or heating up. All those kulas, it's not just the Ramah. The Ramah, like we said, is relying on a very significant list of Rishonim, and which the Ravadia adds to that list. Now, and number two, the second siruf is that even if the halacha, to make a creative svek a double suffix, even if the halacha is not like them, but it's like the Ran and the Rashba and the Rambam, which you quoted before, like the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, then perhaps you can also mitzaref the halacha will be that there is no isar by sachir. The Shulchan Aruch we spoke last week, based on the Ramban, that holds that if you have an eved kanuilo, that since according to this sword to say that it's because everything the eved does is bal korkai, it's not with his own das, and that takes away the isar of chasnas. And the Shulchan Aruch had one day like that, even though the Shulchan didn't pass in that way, but a sachir, someone who is rented, is hired out. We had a significant number of poskim Rishonim that hold that also helps. And so, but Sirif the Das Araidid, that holds that anything done in a base Israel for the sake of Israel is always mutter. That takes away chasnas, and we're talking about restaurants that are Jewish restaurants. So that's another reason to bona fide that tzad of saying that a sacher, someone who's working for the Jew and not doing it from his own accord, from the goodness of his heart, is also a heter. So again, so we have a svek. Maybe the halacha is like those that hold that's enough that the Jew likes the fire, and even if not, maybe there's no isser of bishul akum at all by a sacher, by hired help. Now, Ravadia is faced by a problem with that both of these studim of the svek are both against the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch himself paskins not like the poskim that hadlakas ha'esh is enough, and Shulchan Aruch also paskins it's not enough to have a sachir. Paskins not like the Ravid that what's done in the Beis Yisrael is all asur. However, he brings a long list of Sephardi poskim that hold that even if both sudden of a suffix of the svek are both against the Shulchan Aruch, since sof kosof you create a svek in the Rishonim and the poskim, it's considered a svek even for Sephardim. And therefore, he says that those Sephardi Jews who are mekel to eat in the Rabbanut Hashkachas that or Samach or any Hashkacha that's Samach on Ashkenazi Minig, the Samach on Ramah, Yesh Lem Al Milismuch. They have who to rely upon, and therefore you don't have to mocha them. They certainly have a strong reliance to be able to do that, to be able to not, not to have to refrain from going into restaurants or into hotels. He ends off saying, "Hamachmer al atzma tavalav bracha." There will be a bracha on a Sephardi that's machmer not to do that, but they have who to rely upon. So I would just add in there an important word of caution that it would be important to since there is Ravadi over here in Samachan and he's relying on very strong reasons to be makel over here. So sometimes it's important to know when to be machmer mekel, and sometimes one can be try to be machmer, but then it turns out to be a bigger kula that people feel squeezed and sort of like they don't have any restaurants to go to, they don't have any hotels to go to, they feel like they don't have any outlet. That could also have very bad ramifications. I'll just give you an example of that Rosh Zalman Auerbach was very, very strong about having an Erev in a city. And I discussed it with one time about creating an Erev. He was unusually strong about how important it is and how it's impossible to create a Kira community and expect people to stay home. So a friend of mine who was driving with him once filled me in on this, on why he was so vehemently strong about it. He told him the story that when Shmuel Salant originally wanted to create the Erev in Yerushalayim, he went then to I forgot who it was, the then Rishon LeZion, the Sephardi chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, to ask him to be Mishtatef. And first he said yes, and then he called him back. They said, "I'm sorry, he thought about it, he can't be Mishtatef because since the Shittas Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, that the type of Erev that we use doesn't work according to Sephardim, according to the Rambam, because it has to be full walls, not just strings across, doesn't help in the Rambam. And that's the minute of the Sephardim, therefore he can't support that. He can't allow the Sephardim to rely on it and use that Erev." And Rav Shlomo Zalman said with great frustration, because of that Chumrah, we lost an entire door of Sephardim in Eretz Yisrael. That Yiddishkeit became too severe for them, too strong. It was too difficult to stay home, so they threw off the entire Yiddishkeit. So one has to be careful to where to be machmir. And since Rav Vadia has a kula for Sephardim, then I would say, especially for our door, that people are certainly weak today. That's very important to not be machmir at the cost of people feeling they're stuck and they can't eat any place or stay in a hotel. Okay, now talk about a few pratim in the Ramah here, in the Shittas Ramah, to go back to some of the nekudas that he says here. According to the Ramah, he says the lashon chitui ma'at is enough, which means a bit of chitui, which comes from lashon Rambam. So the poskim speak out that even though we say chitui ma'at, at least there has to be some level of tikkun of the eish, tikkun eish k'tzas. Even though we don't have to visibly see how stirring the fire is going to visibly speed up the cooking process, but there has to be some way of seeing that there's that there's a change to the fire. Now, we don't today have any stirring of the coals. Today we have either gas or electric, ranges, and there's nothing to stir. Today our stirring will be to turn up the knob. So if a person will turn up the gas, if it's a gas stove and it turns up the gas, then that clearly probably even works, very possibly even according to the Shulchan Aruch, because you actually are visibly, anytime you turn off the fire, you're going to visibly change the, or electric as well. You're going to speed up the bishul process. So perhaps that might even work according to the Shulchan Aruch himself. And especially according to the Ramah, you don't need to see clearly any mehirus, any speeding up of the bishul process. Certainly, it's going to work in the Ramah. So now the Chelekos Binyamin, he discusses an interesting question of if you have let's say a stove or an oven with a thermostat, and often the way a thermostat works is let's say the fire is on now, and you turn up to a higher temperature. It's not going to increase the heat of the fire itself. It's not going to cause any more burning or any more electricity to be used right now. What it will do is usually it will keep the fire on longer, because the prolonged process will then will lead to a higher concentration of heat. So the extra heat that's going to come is not directly being done, but it's done through a process of grama. It's a causative act of grama rather than a direct act of heating up the fire. So the Chalgos Binyamin, he brings rayas from a gra and others that grama doesn't help for bishul akum. Although we find certain kulas, even according to the Ramah, the kula of a hashlachas eish throwing a twig in, whatever, in a way that but still, sof kol sof, you threw it with some change to the fire. Here you don't do any change to the fire itself. You're only gorim that in the future, distant or not so distant future, but it's directly now you did nothing. So that grama doesn't help him. That's what he paskins. However, the minchas, that's his own chiddush. Minchas Yitzchak, Dayan Weiss, that's all paskins explicitly. It's in Chelik Dalid, Siman Chav Ches, Ois Dalid, that a grama does help for bishul akum. That since we find that a shinui ba'alma, since we need as a heker ba'alma, some kind of a heker that the Jew is involved, the fact that the Jew did it at all, even that's through a grama, is mutter, and certainly the Minchas Yitzchak certainly one that we could be sabach on, that if somebody did do that ma'aseh grama, and it's for sure better to do something to be machmer if you could. You can easily open the oven and close it, or sometimes you can even turn it off and back on again. And the kuliyama, even according to the Shulchan Aruch, even for Sfardim, that will help if you turn it off and back on again. But even if all the Jew did was turn up the thermostat, then we have the Minchas Yitzchak to rely upon to say that it should be mutter. Now, another nakuda in the Ramah here that is matir b'li kavana. We mentioned that before, that it's a machlokas achronim, the shach and the taz are cholik on him. They say it's missing a heker, and we said a teretz that according to the Ramah, you don't need a heker because you actually created a bishul Yisrael over here. So ladin and the Chalgos Binyamin paskins that if there is any time left before the end of the bishul, one should try to be machmer like the shach and the taz, and to do another ma'aseh with kavana, to be mitaken the bishul akum. But b'di'evet or b'shas tzchak, then we certainly have the Ramah to rely upon. We have to keep in mind that these are all durabbanans over here, and with these machlokas and durabbanans, certainly we have to rely upon. And ein lanu, like the Divrei Ramah, where Moshe writes in one shuvah that by a certain halacha in Yeridea that in Tarubis that the Ramah says a certain sak, and the shach and the taz and everybody just all jump on him and are very, very strongly against him. It has to do with davar gush. But Rav Moshe writes that the klal b'yadeinu is that even when all the achronim are against him, still the Ramah for us is still psak halacha. So we can be machmer, not like him sometimes, but when it comes down to it, the ikar psak halacha is like the Ramah. There's a Chassam Sofer that takes somebody to task in a tshuva very strongly for being cholik on a Ramah, and the Chassam Sofer brings many rayas against him and shows how the Ramah is right. At the end, he says that klal hu b'yadeinu, that the halacha is like the Ramah in Klal Yisrael, and he says v'remez b'davar. It says in Parsh by Shir Sayam, "Ubnei Yisrael yotzim biyad Ramah." So over here, we certainly all these kulas over here, we can sort of see why Klal Yisrael, went with the restaurant. We have to become so for we have their. And that also Hmi H other is also mutter. So here's interesting that the Chalgos Binyamin points out that from the lesson of the Isser Beheter, the Ramah is based on, he says that is mutter b'di'evet, and when the Ramah said before B'chin Noagim, it's mashma that these dinim, besides this particular din, are all chatchila. So why should this be different? Why should eish be different? So he says that maybe it's less of a hecker. It's less of a hecker because it's once removed from the original fire that the Jew lit. Now you have the goy lighting from that, and then starting the whole new process. So maybe that's why the lashon Ramah from this or heter is only b'diavad. But the kashrus agencies I mentioned they try to be samach on this latchila. I mean, they're samach on this latchila unless there is like situations of, let's say, a bishul, you have a mashgiach tamidi, you have the ability to not just like the classic example in our door of eish me'eish is going to be a pilot light. Okay, that's going to be the situation where if you have in some of the newer ovens, the newer stoves are not work. They always work by they don't have a pilot light that stays lit. You're going to ignite the pilot light first, and from there you're going to light the rest. But in the older, more simple versions or the older versions, you had a pilot light that stayed lit all the time, and from there, when you light the other fires, it lights from the pilot light. So most kashrus agencies would rely on the fact that the yid lit the pilot light in order to not to the rest of it, because then that's a situation of eish me'eish. The many kashrus agencies, in order not to rely on this Ramah, since it's only a b'diavad, well, if you have a mashgiach tamidi, so whenever the fire is going to be lit, to always have the mashgiach light the fire before the goy starts the cooking process, and that you said the chuli alma, because now this second fire is also lit by the yid. When it's possible to do that, but most chsherim do rely on pilot lights. So this is even a further kula of the Ramah. It's a kula within the kula, but we still this is the minhag ha'olam to rely even l'chatchila on pilot lights when you don't have a mashgiach tamidi, or where it's difficult to have them come in at every moment to keep on and there are those that Binyamin clears a shaila. We find that kula by pas that if the tanur or the oven was lit by a Jew, and then the goy is going to be baking, and the tanur is going to keep on staying lit for many, many, many days, and sometimes even if it gets relit, we rely on the fact that if the tanur never really cooled down, it stayed hot enough to bake something, and then the fire went out, then the goy lights it. It's still considered a continuation of the original baking. That's a kula by pas, which we don't necessarily find by bishul. But the fact that we find that all the hashgachas are relying on pilot lights, the pilot lights are certainly something which remain lit for many, many days. So we see that we are relying on that kula as well, the gabe bishul. Just like I said, like in the better hashgachas in restaurants or in the hotels, when there's a mashgiach around, and they try to have the mashgiach be the one who lights the actual fire, even from the pilot light, when it's possible. Now, there is a practical issue that arises often, which is that pilot lights, if you don't have a mashgiach there all the time, and certain types of hashgachas don't necessarily require having a mashgiach there all the time, let's say if they don't have meat in the place, like a pizza place or whatever, certain types of hashgachas don't really need a mashgiach tamidi, and it's hard for them to afford it, so they don't have a mashgiach tamidi, and the pilot light goes out. So how diligent you think the goyish workers are going to be to you have a whole restaurant full of people waiting for their food, and to wait for an hour to call the mashgiach to come and relight the pilot light. It's not going to be too often that you're going to find someone that will do that. So it becomes pretty much, and we know the pilot lights do go out every so often. There are two different types of pilot lights. Some are covered over by a plate or whatever, and they're pretty protected from food and from spillage and from the wind and everything. So they're probably going to stay lit for a good few weeks until something will happen to go out. And you have others that are much more open to the elements and go out often. So especially the second type, but even the first type. So then, what are we relying upon? Because when the mashgiach comes in, it's lit. He doesn't know it went out, but at some point it probably does go out, and we don't know if they don't tell us that. So how could we, continue to eat there? Maybe it was lit by a goy, and everything was done by a goy. So what they're relying upon that Rabbi Cohen in his Sefer speaks about is that in that CRC and other hashkachas rely upon is the Ramah and Sifyud Aleph, as we saw, and the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah paskin that Suffolk Bishul Akum is mutar. Why? Because since the whole Isser Bishul Akum is Drabanan, then just like we say everything else, Suffolk Drabanan Lakula. And now we have a Yisodis Techam Achlokas in the Beis Yosef and the Darkei Moshe in the Beis Yosef, but if we have a Suffolk Matsui, like if the goy turn the meat upside down, turn the meat over on the grill, so it'd be very much he could have left it on the fire the whole time and just turned it while it stayed on the fire, and therefore it was not considered a new process. Or he could have lifted it up off the fire and then put it back down again, which would be a new process. Before it was Michael ben Rasoi, and therefore it would be mamish bishul akum. And you don't know, the goy is standing there and doing it, and you turn your back for a few minutes. So how do you know? So the Shulchan Aruch is machmer in that case. The Ramah says that the Shulchan Aruch is being too machmer in a place where it doesn't need to be, because Suffolk Draban on the Kula. We see from the Ramah that even and it's something which is matzoi, if we don't know, then we're allowed to rely on Suffolk Draban on the Kula. So this is a limit schus for all those who, for all those hashkachas, or especially the out of town hashkachas that can't afford to have a mashgiach all the time, and you don't have such a great quantity of people that are buying there and can't afford that. So they have what to rely on. They have to rely on the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, Sifyud Aleph, that Savar Rabbanan Lakula. If you don't know, then you don't have to be choshesh that maybe it went out and was lit by a goy. But in the places where it's possible to have, because of this reason, the CRC in Chicago is machmir to have a mashgiach tamidi, even in those type of restaurants that wouldn't normally require it because of the type of food that's being cooked there. There's no problem with basar, sin, salmon, iron, or fish or anything, but still they would try to always have a mashgiach tamidi for this reason, in order to ensure that you're never going to have bishul akum. Because if there is a mashgiach there all the time, then the goy doesn't lose anything. If he knows the fire goes out, he knows to call the mashgiach who's right in the next room to be able to turn the fire on, and we have not at all cautious that he's going to do that without asking. Okay, so that's with regards to Sif Zion. With Hashem, maybe I think we'll try, if we can, at the beginning of next week to have insert an extra shear in to take us a little further. So in order by the end of next week, we can try to finish the Siman and the Shirim and also the Chazorah, so that in the following week we can go to the Bechina. Kol Tuv and all the best. Yes?
No, I was just saying Shikoyach.
Okay. Baruch to you. Kol Tuv.